Alright guys, welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about my views on open source versus closed source. Now, before I get in, I'm just going to quick say there's a time for closed source and a time for open source. That's kind of what I'm going to try to base my video around. And really this is just my opinion, so people can disagree or agree with me, whatever, because it's my opinion, so not everyone will agree with me, most likely. But this is what, and just gonna get started here. Now, this doesn't always have to do with the LU projects. This could be just open source and closed source in general. In general, I believe it depends. Now, like just in general, open source can be good, but it also can be bad. Now, if you have open source, that means it's much more vulnerable to attacks, but it's also much more helpful due to the fact that someone can help you, like if there was some kind of bug or glitch or something on whatever you're making or whatever product you have, then someone just regular person doesn't have to be developing on it, like at a company or something, or if like it's some framework that's open source. If it's got, like, someone can implement new features into it if they have the time or something. Like, say they have time, oh man, I have a bunch of time and I really like this, I'm just gonna implement more features, or a feature, something like that, and they can do that. That's one of the pros with open source, because anyone can really just look at it, but that also can be a bad thing because then that can make it more vulnerable for hacking, and that it just can make it less secure. But it also, like, there's a lot of pros and cons to that. For closed source, I believe that it has its times, and it also can be a good or bad thing. Both of these things, both these open source and closed source, can be both good or bad things. Just depends on the way you use them and your opinion. Now, open source, I kind of lean toward that as personally my opinion, but I see when there are times for closed source. So, now in the LU projects right now, currently there's technically only one closed source project, which is Dark Flame Universe. Now, I kind of leave that as an exception for me because mainly if I were them personally, if I were them at the time when they were making this project a while back, then I would probably not want to make it open source, mostly because you don't want something like overhype is saying like, oh man, we're starting this Lego universe and everything, and then just make it open public, and the public expecting it to be really good when really you're still experimenting on stuff and just figuring out how it all works. And that is why I think they have gone on for so long, doing so well. And Opcrux also started off technically closed source as well. So I think that starting off closed source like that was a very good idea, mostly because of the fact that they were still kind of coming up with things and learning about how to actually build it, and not really focusing. I don't know, but my guess is that they weren't really focusing on implementing new features or anything. They were just kind of learning how it all worked. So, and it's been working for DLU. I mean, it's been working for them. So I don't know if they should now make it open source, especially since they've been planning for a closed beta for so long. So with Opcrux, they basically just pretty recently released their code to the public, and I mean, while their code is open source, it's not really like many people are doing it, like many people are getting on that server, mainly because it's very, 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 very difficult to set up for an average member of the community. So personally, to me, like, it still feels like it's closed source to me, but I'm glad they released the code at least, Um, that's what they wanted to do, so they did that. So I guess it's really what your project wants, like what the people that are developing the project want. Like it's really on an opinion basis. Really, I don't think there's any right or wrong reason, unless you're like, I mean, for LU in a sense. But then when you're a company, like if you're um, a just a regular company and you want to put your app out there, and some people have their code on GitHub or Bitbuckets or an equivalent to that. Uh, like for example, I mean this is like something that I would expect to be open source. I mean, Unreal Engine is kind of open source. It's got their code on GitHub, but I believe you might have to have like a link or something, or it's not as easy to get their code, I believe, but you can, and you can edit it and do this stuff like that. You can like contribute to the Unreal Engine. I don't know if Unity has open source. I've never actually checked. I don't think they do, but I mean, there's a lot of places that actually are now going open source. I know, like maybe they're not big, super big developers or anything, but they're smaller ones maybe, smaller companies maybe. But I mean, it's really just personal opinion, and my personal opinion is that I believe that open source is pretty good, and that you shouldn't really hesitate to try open source. At least, and maybe you don't have to give all your code, but at least give the basic UI design. Like basic, like if you have an app, maybe give like maybe not all the functionality, but just give like what the basic layout looks like. Maybe not have the anything work, but just have what it looks like just so people can see. Okay, that's how they did it. Maybe because like I guess that would prevent maybe hackers, because if you're just giving them the UI design, um, then maybe that would prevent and would give better security while having the community or something of your certain app or game or whatever the project actually be able to be seen and be like, okay, so that's how some of it works in the background. And also the thing is, in LU projects, as it doesn't really matter as much for open source sometimes, but it does sometimes for other. It just depends on you, I guess, and whether you want to put yours out there. But I mean, a lot of resources for the projects are open source. That's a big deal. I think that's a more big deal than the projects being open source, because you can see what resources they actually use. And I don't think all of them are open source, but there are a lot of them that are, such as PyRankNet. That's for an equivalent to RankNet, like for Python equivalent of it. But I don't think it has all the features like that the actual RankNet does. But you see, there's a bunch of open source resources like the documentation, which usually an app's documentation is open source anyway, which I think is very good. I mean, this wasn't saying like either one is better, I don't think, in this video. This was just kind of me explaining a little bit of my views and kind of the pros and cons of what you'll think of when you're like figuring out what your project should be, open or closed source. I don't think there's definitely a right answer. I think it's really just your personal opinion. Maybe there is a right or wrong answer, but to me, I don't think there is. I think it's just, if you think your company or whatever would thrive open source, then you can try that. And if you can try both, I guess. I mean, maybe start closed source, opening it gradually up to the public, maybe. And DLU anyway is making closed beta, so you don't really have to worry about them. Like I said, they're kind of an exception personally, and I feel like every project's different. They're doing closed beta. I don't know really too much about Upcrux, but I know they released their code but aren't giving any support for it, and you shouldn't ask questions about how to develop it unless you're planning to develop. That's what it says in the README, so they're not going to help you unless you plan to help with development on that server. So don't expect to get Upcrux running if you at least don't know how to develop. So with other projects, you can have Uchu or WAUS for if you actually want to get one up and running. WAUS probably for the average member of the community would be the most ideal, as it is it seems like the easiest setup to actually work with, and it's not a bad project. It may be pretty inactive at the moment, but I mean, what's stopping you from learning the language that it's used and actually helping that project? What's stopping you? Maybe something is stopping you. I'm just saying, like, you can help it if you want. I mean, if you have the knowledge basis, or you want to get the knowledge basis and learn that. But anyway, if you're thinking about getting a project up and running, then you probably would want to start with WLUS, because that's probably, for the average member of the community, probably the most ideal. See, you don't need the most technical knowledge. I mean, you just need to know how to change a boot file. If it depends on the client anyway, but like, you really don't need to do too much with WLUS. At least the older version, I believe they've updated it some, which makes it a little harder to set up. I've never tried. What I believe it's updated because they have on GitHub, it's a work in progress server, and then they have click here for an older release. So I believe the older release like is the easier one. I don't know anyone who's tried to actually set up the newer one, because I don't know really what's changed in it too much. Like, I don't think there's been like a lot changed so much that a lot of people would want to go the extra mile to set that up, with at least WLUS. But the older version is what pretty much everyone has used. I don't think people many know that they've added more to it since then, but I believe they have. But anyway, I got on a little bunny trail about WLUS there. But mainly, I'm here to say, like, if you're wondering whether your project should go, like, if you're developing an app or a game or something, whether your project should go open source or closed source, I mean, you kind of have to find that out yourself, because like, everyone's different, and pretty much everyone's app and game is different. Like, in some way it's different. So, and you don't know what, if you're making a game or app, you don't know what the how it's going to work out. So I mean, you might not want to release the source code right away as soon as you start, maybe. Like, I mean, with LU it's kind of an exception, but if you're doing like an app or a game, making one, I don't think you should release the source code right away. But I mean, it's your call, really. But anyway, I personally think open source projects, now here's my final statement. Open source projects are good, but they can only be as good as the person that actually monitors them. And also that it's really just your call. Like I've said, it's really your call. But if you don't, I mean, that goes with pretty much any project though. I mean, if you don't monitor it well, and you don't, like, I mean, you can make it, but if you don't keep with it, then it's probably not going to keep making money or keep getting popularity, because you're not actually using it. Now, this video is a little out of the ordinary for me. I don't really do too many videos. I haven't really had many videos on my channel anyway, but I mean, this, I thought it would be pretty cool to have a talk about open source, closed source, what are kind of some pros and cons to it, and what are my opinions, and really, I mean, just have an overall discussion about it. That's really what I just wanted to have this video for. Now, I personally have respect for all the LU projects out there personally, because I'm super happy that people are making the dedication that they're doing to bring this game back. Even how small it could be, they're still doing their best, and starting it up is not an easy task, starting a server. So even though it may seem easy to the regular person, like to a person who doesn't really know too much about LU, like backend, I guess. I mean, really, whenever you're new to the community, you kind of don't really think that it's that hard, as it actually is. I mean, that's the way it was with me, and that's the way it was with a lot of people. Like, when you start off and are new to the community, especially now, you don't know, like, okay, why is it taking so long? And I'm not going to say anything on that, because there is a video on that out there. But anyway, like, it's very tough. It can be very tough to be a developer for really any big project, especially this one, because it's more than just programming anyway. But anyway, that was my kind of discussion on open source versus closed source, my views, like, and a little bit of pros and cons, and that's really what I had here. So I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you enjoyed this content and want to see more LU content, then I'd recommend subscribing. You don't have to, of course, but if you turn on alerts, then you'll get notifications every time I post a video, so that you'll be up to date with whatever I'm talking about or whatever I'm doing, anything gameplay speedruns. I'm actually planning on doing speedruns as soon as I can here. But anyway, I'm the All You Baker, and I will see you in the next one. Oh, and by the way, I'm not a developer. If in any way I made myself seem like I was one, I'm not a developer. I have no inside information. I just want to make that clear to anyone watching this video. Goodbye.